They say one of the deepest human fears isn't death, but being left behind. Picture this. You're sitting with someone you love, and suddenly, a silence falls. They glance at their phone, look away for just a moment, and your chest tightens. A storm rises inside you, anger, panic, maybe a desperate urge to pull them back toward you. Why does something so small feel like the ground is disappearing under your feet? This is the fear of abandonment, an ancient shadow, hiding behind so many of our modern struggles. And here's the truth. It's rarely about what's happening right now. It's about what was buried long ago, in places we don't like to look. How many times have you felt that ache when someone didn't text back? How many nights have you lain awake, replaying conversations, terrified you said too much or not enough? The fear feels fresh, but it's really an echo, an old wound playing itself out again in your relationships, your friendships, even at work. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the hidden part of us carrying everything we try to deny, repress, or forget. Abandonment sits right there, crouching in the dark, waiting for a trigger. That's why a small rejection feels like collapse. Why a partner's distance feels like betrayal. Why even success can feel hollow if you're haunted by the thought of being left alone. The more we run from this fear, the more power it gains. Avoid it and it shapes your choices in silence. You cling too tightly, you sabotage intimacy, you chase approval, and the shadow only grows heavier. Picture a child standing at the door, waiting for a parent who never comes home on time. That child learns quickly. Love is uncertain, connection can vanish. Years later, the adult version of that child sits in meetings, friendships, relationships. But inside, the same whisper remains. They will leave you too. This fear isn't just personal, it's archetypal. It shows up in myths of exiled heroes, betrayed lovers, children lost in the woods. It's as old as humanity itself, and yet it's also painfully modern. In the age of social media, where a single "seen without reply" can feel like rejection, our ancient wound has found new ways to torment us. And here's the twist. Abandonment doesn't only appear when someone leaves. It can appear when someone comes too close. The shadow turns intimacy into danger. You crave closeness, but you fear it. You push people away before they can walk away. You build walls to keep yourself safe, but those same walls keep you lonely. So the real question becomes, how do you face this shadow without being consumed by it? How do you move from panic and clinging into strength and connection? And perhaps more importantly, how do you recognize when it's the shadow speaking and not reality in the present moment? Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you'll not only understand how the fear of abandonment works in the unconscious, but you'll also discover ways to loosen its grip. We'll uncover the signs, the patterns, the hidden roots. And the last one, the deepest root Jung warned about, is the one almost nobody expects. The fear of abandonment may feel like a private issue, something hidden in the corners of your heart. But in truth, it's a universal thread woven through the human story. Almost everyone at some point has felt the sting of being ignored or forgotten. The difference lies in how we respond. Some bury the feeling, others numb it. Some chase love or success endlessly. But beneath every strategy lies the same truth. What we avoid in the light comes alive in the dark. This is where shadow work begins. Jung used the word shadow to describe the parts of ourselves we don't want to see. It could be anger, jealousy, shame, or fear. But often, it's tender wounds we've hidden because they felt too dangerous to reveal. Abandonment is one of the deepest. And here's the key. The shadow doesn't vanish just because we repress it. The more we ignore it, the louder it speaks, through our reactions, our relationships, and our choices. Think about the last time you overreacted. Maybe someone canceled plans, and instead of brushing it off, you spiraled into worry. Maybe a partner asked for space, and you felt rage or despair, even though they just needed rest. On the surface, these reactions seem irrational, but peel back the layers, and you'll find the shadow pulling the strings, whispering, "See? You're not worthy. They'll leave you too." Why does this matter so much right now? Because modern life amplifies the shadow in ways Jung never could have predicted. Social media thrives on comparison. Dating apps reward quick attraction, but rarely build deep trust. Workplaces push performance over connection. Everywhere you turn, subtle reminders say love, attention, and belonging can vanish in a second. For a generation already carrying childhood wounds, this doesn't heal them, it magnifies them. That's why shadow work isn't a trend. It's survival. It's noticing when your old wounds are steering the wheel of your life. It's pausing long enough to ask, is this really about today, or is my shadow replaying an old story? Imagine two people facing the same moment. Both are left on read after sending a heartfelt message. One shrugs it off, knowing people get busy. The other spirals, panicking about what they did wrong. Same event, two realities. What makes the difference? The shadow. If the wound of abandonment is unhealed, silence feels like proof you're unworthy. If the wound has been faced, silence is just silence. Nothing more, nothing less. Shadow work requires courage. It asks you to face the very thing you most want to run from, but when you do, you unlock freedom. Instead of being trapped in cycles of fear, you begin to choose. Instead of clinging to people out of desperation, you connect from strength. Instead of sabotaging relationships, you nurture them with clarity. And here's something important. Shadow work isn't about fixing yourself because you're not broken. It's about meeting the parts of you that feel scared, abandoned, or angry, and saying, I see you. I won't leave you behind. That small act changes everything. Suddenly, you're no longer at war with yourself. The energy you once used to hide your wounds can now be used to heal, to create, to love. This work matters now more than ever, because we live in an age of masks, curated profiles, highlight reels, smiles hiding struggles. In a world obsessed with appearances, shadow work gives you permission to be real, and in that realness, connection deepens. Relationships grow stronger. Confidence stops being a performance and starts being a lived truth. As we move forward, we'll look at how the fear of abandonment shows up in different layers, sometimes obvious, sometimes hidden. We'll uncover the signs one by one. But before we get there, pause for a moment. What happens inside you when you imagine being left behind? What emotions rise? What memories surface? That's your shadow speaking. And learning to listen without judgment is the very first step in healing. There's an old story told across many cultures about a child lost in the forest. At first, the child runs after the parent who has gone too far ahead. But soon, the realization sets in. They are alone. The trees loom tall, the shadows stretch long, and every sound feels like danger. What began as adventure turns into terror. It isn't just fear of wild animals or the dark. It's the crushing sense of being left behind, unseen, forgotten. This story isn't just a myth, it's the timeless image of abandonment. That child lives inside each of us, the part that panics when connection slips away. The forest becomes a symbol of the unconscious. The darkness isn't just outside, it's within, filled with memories and fears we try to bury. Now, let's bring this into modern life. Imagine someone named Alex. On the outside, Alex seems to have it all: a steady job, a group of friends, a decent apartment. But beneath that polished surface, the fear of abandonment runs deep. It began years ago when Alex's father left. At 8 years old, Alex made a silent promise. I'll never depend on anyone again. Independence became the mask. Strong, self-sufficient, untouchable. But the shadow always finds its way through the mask. For Alex, it shows up most clearly in dating. The first few weeks of romance feel exciting, even safe. But the moment a partner takes too long to reply, the forest returns. The child inside whispers, "They'll leave you too." Suddenly, Alex is sending frantic texts, scrolling through old conversations, scanning social media for clues. From the outside, it looks like insecurity. On the inside, it feels like survival. And here's the painful paradox. The more we pretend not to need connection, the harder we collapse when it feels like it's slipping away. Friends may offer advice like, just relax, stop overthinking. But that never lands, because the reaction isn't coming from logic, it's coming from the shadow. The child in the forest doesn't care about rational explanations. That child only knows fear. Can you see how this story repeats itself? Whether in childhood, dating, friendships, or at work, the pattern is the same. Connection feels fragile. Being left behind feels like death. Maybe you felt it too scrolling through your phone at night, seeing photos of friends at a gathering you weren't invited to. Your chest tightens, your thoughts race. Why wasn't I included? Did I do something wrong? A peaceful night turns into hours of restless worry. Again, the shadow whispers, "You don't belong." This is why stories like The Lost Child in the Forest matter. They give shape to emotions we struggle to name. When abandonment strikes, you're not just reacting to a text, a canceled plan, or a missed invite. You're stepping back into the forest of your unconscious, where the past and present blur together. But here's the hopeful side of the story. In some versions of the myth, the child doesn't stay lost. They find a lantern, or a guide, or strength they didn't know they had. That's the deeper meaning of shadow work. The forest that once terrified you can become the very place where you discover your light. For Alex, that shift began the day they realized the panic wasn't about a late text. It was about an 8-year-old still waiting at the door, still hoping their father would return. When Alex finally acknowledged that inner child, something softened. Instead of drowning in fear, they whispered, "I see you. I won't abandon you." That moment of recognition became the lantern. And maybe that's your invitation too. The next time you feel the sting of being left out or ignored, pause. Ask yourself, is this really about today, or am I back in the forest again? That single question can open space, and in that space, healing begins. Because the truth is, the fear of abandonment may never fully disappear. But when you face it, when you name it, it loses the power to control you. You stop stumbling blindly in the dark, and you begin to walk with a lantern in your hand, guided not by fear, but by awareness. When the fear of abandonment hides in the shadow, it rarely shows up in obvious ways. Instead, it slips through cracks in our behavior, our emotions, and our relationships. On the surface, it might look like simple habits or quirks, but underneath, the same wound is speaking. Let's walk through the first 3 ways it reveals itself. The first is clinging to relationships out of fear, not love. Maybe you've stayed in a friendship or romance long after you knew it wasn't good for you, simply because the thought of being alone felt unbearable. Instead of asking, "Do I actually want this connection?" the question becomes, "Will I survive without it?" So you cling. You tolerate neglect, disrespect, or stagnation because leaving feels like walking back into the forest again. The shadow convinces you that any connection, even a painful one, is better than none. And the cost? You shrink. You abandon your needs and boundaries just to keep someone close. Here's something to try. Look at your relationships and ask yourself, am I here out of love or out of fear? Notice what your body tells you when you ask. That answer often speaks louder than logic. The second sign is overreacting to small moments of distance. A partner takes a little longer to text back. A friend cancels plans. A coworker seems distracted. To most people, these are small things. But when the abandonment wound is alive, they feel catastrophic. Why? Because the shadow magnifies absence. Silence doesn't feel like a pause, it feels like rejection. A canceled dinner isn't about scheduling, it feels like proof you're not wanted. You might know in your mind it's not a big deal, yet your chest tightens, panic rises, anger floods in. That's the shadow pulling old echoes into the present. Next time this happens, pause and ask yourself, what story am I telling right now? Is it about today, or is it an old wound repeating itself? Writing the story down, even in a few lines, can give you just enough distance to see the difference. The third sign is sabotaging intimacy before it gets too close. This one sounds backwards. If you fear abandonment, why would you push people away? But here's the paradox. For many, closeness itself feels dangerous. Think of it like this. If you let someone all the way in, they have the power to hurt you. The unconscious solution becomes, don't let them get too close. So, you nitpick flaws. You pick fights. You pull away just when things start to feel safe. On the outside, it looks like commitment issues or fear of vulnerability. But underneath, it's the shadow trying to protect you. Better to leave first, it whispers, than to be left behind. And here's the heartbreak. The fear of abandonment ends up creating the loneliness it dreads. Relationships don't collapse because others walked away, they collapse because the shadow pushed them out before they had the chance to stay. Think back to the last time you pulled away from someone. Was it because they truly weren't right for you? Or was it because the fear of being left felt too strong? That question can be uncomfortable, but it's also where transformation begins. These three patterns, clinging, overreacting, and sabotaging closeness, may look different, but they share the same root. The old wound whispering, "You are not safe to be left alone." The good news is this: once you recognize these patterns, you've already loosened their hold. Awareness breaks the spell, and every time you pause, reflect, and see the shadow clearly, its grip begins to weaken. We've already seen how the shadow makes people cling, panic, and push others away. But the fear of abandonment doesn't stop there. It wears other masks too, ones that can look like strength, confidence, or independence on the surface, but underneath are fueled by the same old wound. Let's explore 3 more ways it shows up. One of the most common is people-pleasing. At first glance, being agreeable looks like kindness. Who doesn't want to be flexible, supportive, easy to get along with? But when it comes from fear, it's not kindness anymore, it's survival. The shadow whispers, "If I keep everyone happy, they won't leave me." So you say yes when you mean no. You hold back your real opinions. You go out of your way to avoid conflict. People may see you as generous, but inside you feel drained, unseen, even resentful. And here's the sad part. People-pleasing doesn't create true closeness. It creates dependency on approval. And worse, it trains you to abandon yourself first, long before anyone else ever could. Think back to a time you said yes when your whole body wanted to say no. What did you fear would happen if you were honest? Rejection? Disapproval? Losing connection? Those fears are the script of the shadow. The second mask is overachieving. Some people answer their fear of abandonment by chasing success with relentless energy. They become top students, star employees, high performers in every arena. On the outside, they look unstoppable. On the inside, every achievement is really a plea. If I accomplish enough, no one will leave me. The shadow convinces you that worth must be earned, that love is conditional. So you push harder, climb higher, never rest. The applause becomes a substitute for love. The trophies become armor against loneliness. But here's the trap. No achievement ever feels like enough. The moment the applause fades, the old wound speaks again. Without facing the shadow, overachievers stay on a treadmill of proving, never arriving. Ask yourself this: if I stopped achieving for a year, no promotions, no awards, no praise, would I still believe I deserve love? The unease you feel in answering that question shows how much of your drive comes from inspiration and how much comes from fear. The third mask is emotional withdrawal. On the opposite end of clinging or pleasing, some people cope by shutting down. They keep conversations surface level. They avoid vulnerability. They wall off their hearts. This is the shadow's defense. If no one gets close, no one can leave. From the outside, it can look like independence or strength. But inside, it's often loneliness disguised as self-sufficiency. The longing for connection is still there, but buried under thick walls built to keep pain out. The cost of those walls is high. Real intimacy becomes almost impossible. Friends and partners feel shut out. And in the end, the person withdrawing ends up experiencing the very thing they feared: abandonment. Only this time, it's self-inflicted. Think about the last time someone asked how you really felt, and you brushed it off with a vague answer. What would it have been like to share just one more layer of truth? Not everything, just a little more. Those small moments of honesty are the cracks where light can enter. People-pleasing, overachieving, and withdrawing may look like different paths, but they lead to the same place. They shield you from rejection in the short term, but over time they create the very loneliness you're running from. And here's the paradox. The strategies that once kept you safe as a child become prisons when you carry them into adulthood. They worked when you were small and powerless. But now, you have choices. The shadow isn't a monster to destroy, it's a wound to understand. The deeper layers of abandonment fear are even trickier. They hide in patterns so normalized we barely notice them. These hidden signs are the ones Jung believed most dangerous, because they work silently under the surface. That's what we'll uncover next. Some signs of abandonment fear are easy to recognize: the clinging, the panic, the people-pleasing. But the shadow also hides in silence, weaving patterns so subtle we often mistake them for normal. These are the deeper, more dangerous signs, because they run quietly beneath our awareness. Let's bring 3 of them into the light. The first is choosing unavailable partners again and again. Maybe you've noticed how some people always fall for the one who can't commit, the one who's too busy, too distant, already attached to someone else. On the surface, it looks like bad luck. But beneath it, the shadow is replaying the same story. The hidden logic goes like this: if abandonment is inevitable, better to choose someone who will prove it. Predictable heartbreak feels safer than risking real intimacy and being surprised by the pain. It's a twisted form of control. Confirming your deepest fear feels less terrifying than hoping and being let down. Think back to the last few people you've been drawn to. Do you notice a pattern? Were they truly available to love you fully? If not, maybe it wasn't just chance. Maybe the shadow was choosing for you. The second hidden sign is losing yourself in relationships. At first, it can feel like closeness, like deep romance. We're so in sync, we're one. But over time, you realize you've stopped doing what you love. You silence your opinions. You bend your values just to keep the bond alive. Why does this happen? Because the shadow whispers, if I make myself small enough, they won't leave. You trade authenticity for security, only to end up invisible, exhausted, and resentful. Ask yourself this: if my closest relationship ended tomorrow, who would I be? What parts of me would still remain? Your answers will show whether you've been nourishing yourself or slowly erasing yourself. The third sign is attracting crisis as proof of worth. This one can be hard to see. Some people unconsciously stir drama or get pulled into chaos again and again. Why? Because the shadow has linked crisis with connection. If people only rush to your side when you're in pain, then pain becomes the price of belonging. This is why peace can feel so unsettling. Calm feels boring, unsafe, almost unbearable. So conflict is created, or partners are chosen who guarantee turbulence. On a deeper level, the shadow is simply recreating the conditions it knows best. Instability, followed by desperate hope for rescue. Think back to your last few major conflicts. Were they truly unavoidable? Or did part of you, without realizing it, help create them? And when the crisis came, what did it give you? Attention? Care? A sense that you mattered? Facing these questions is uncomfortable, but they open the door to breaking the cycle. These hidden patterns, choosing the unavailable, dissolving yourself, chasing crisis, are the shadow's clever ways of protecting you. But that protection comes at a cost. The shield is heavy, and over time, it becomes a cage. Here's the truth. The shadow isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to keep you safe, using the only tools it knows. The child in the forest learned these strategies to survive. But you are no longer that child. You have more choices now. And awareness is the key that unlocks the cage. So far, we've named the patterns. But awareness alone isn't enough. To really heal the wound of abandonment, you need practice ways of meeting the shadow face to face. Journaling, reflection, and daily rituals become the lanterns that guide you through the forest. And that's where we're heading next. Awareness is the first step. Naming the signs of abandonment fear shines a light on the shadow, but awareness without practice often fades. Real transformation begins when you turn toward the shadow directly, not to fight it, but to listen. Journaling and small daily rituals can become the lantern you carry through the forest. One powerful practice is meeting the inner child. Find a quiet place. Take a slow breath. Close your eyes and picture the younger version of yourself, the child who first felt abandoned. Maybe you see them waiting by a window. Maybe you see them standing in a doorway, watching someone walk away. Don't change the image, just notice. Then, In your journal, write a conversation with this child. Ask, "What are you afraid of? What do you need from me?" Let the answers flow without judgment. Often, the inner voice that emerges is startlingly clear. This is not about reliving pain. It's about creating connection. That child has been waiting for someone to show up, and that someone is you. Another practice is keeping a trigger journal. The shadow speaks loudest when we're triggered. Instead of pushing those moments aside, track them. Write down what happened, what you felt, and the story your mind told you. For example, "My friend didn't reply for hours. I felt worthless." The story, "They don't care about me." Patterns begin to appear. The same fears repeat themselves. And once you see the script, you don't have to play it out blindly anymore. To shift, try writing an alternative view right next to the story. Maybe they're busy. Maybe it's not about me at all. The goal isn't forced positivity. It's simply widening the frame beyond the shadow's narrow lens. Then there's practicing micro-boundaries. Fear of abandonment often leads us to give up boundaries just to keep others close. Healing requires flipping that pattern. Start small. Notice one area where you usually say yes when you want to say no. Maybe it's answering late-night texts. Maybe it's doing favors when you're drained. Maybe it's staying in draining conversations. Pick one small no to practice. When you set that boundary, fear will rise. The shadow might shout, "If I say no, they'll leave me." But notice what actually happens. Often, people respect you more when you're clear. And even if someone reacts poorly, you've proven something vital. You can survive without abandoning yourself. Another exercise is creating a safe connection ritual. Because abandonment wounds distort intimacy, you need steady experiences of safety. Choose one trusted person, a friend, partner, or family member, and create a simple ritual: a weekly coffee, a regular check-in call, even sitting in silence together. The power lies in consistency. Over time, your nervous system learns. Connection can be steady. Love can be safe. You don't have to chase or perform. Small rituals like these rewire the body in ways words alone never could. And finally, build a list of self-soothing anchors. Because sometimes no one is available, and that's when the wound screams the loudest. Have a toolbox ready. Music, meditation, movement, affirmations. Or simply placing a hand on your heart and whispering, "I am here. I will not abandon myself." This isn't about replacing human connection. It's about showing your nervous system that being alone isn't the same as being abandoned. Over time, these anchors turn isolation into solitude, a space where healing can take root. What all these practices share is this: they shift the power back to you. Instead of waiting for someone else to heal your wounds, you begin the work yourself. Each journal entry, each boundary, each ritual is a message to your shadow. I see you. I'm not ignoring you anymore. And slowly, the forest that once felt terrifying becomes a place of discovery. The child no longer waits alone, because you've come back for them. From here, the journey takes us into one of the most powerful arenas where the abandonment wound shows up: love and relationships. Because nothing awakens the shadow more intensely or heals it more deeply than intimacy. If there's one place where the fear of abandonment speaks the loudest, it's love. Romantic relationships act like mirrors, reflecting not only our desires, but also our deepest wounds. The closer we get to another person, the more the shadow stirs. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it shouts, "They will leave you too." At the start, love feels intoxicating. Every text, every glance, every touch feels like proof that you are wanted. But soon, the old fear slips in. A delayed reply triggers panic. A request for space feels like rejection. Joy turns into scanning, watching every sign, searching for proof that abandonment is coming. This cycle is exhausting, not only for the one carrying the wound, but also for their partner. Relationships start to feel like roller coasters, soaring when connection feels safe, crashing when distance triggers fear. Without awareness, love becomes less about intimacy and more about survival. The shadow often drives two opposite behaviors here: clinging and testing. Clinging shows up as constant reassurance seeking. Do you love me? Are you sure? Will you always be here? The partner might answer again and again, but the reassurance never sticks because the wound is older than the relationship. Testing shows up as picking fights, pulling away, or creating drama just to see if the partner will chase. The real question beneath it is, will you fight for me? Will you prove I'm worth staying for? But over time, testing wears down trust and intimacy. No one can keep proving loyalty forever. And then there's jealousy, not the passing kind, but the obsessive kind. The kind that interprets every glance, every like on social media, every mention of another person as danger. Jealousy here isn't really about what the partner is doing. It's about the shadow's memory. The unconscious equation is simple. Attention given elsewhere equals me being abandoned. Even in faithful relationships, the wound insists, you are replaceable. But here's where relationships can become powerful ground for healing. Triggers don't have to destroy love. They can open conversations. Instead of collapsing into panic, you can say, "This feels like my old wound being activated." Instead of testing, you can ask for reassurance openly. Instead of clinging, you can practice grounding yourself while allowing your partner space. Something beautiful happens when you learn to face your shadow in love. You also learn to hold space for your partner's shadow. Because everyone carries wounds. Everyone has parts they try to hide. And when two people are willing to see and support each other's shadows, relationships become sanctuaries rather than battlegrounds. Still, it's important to remember that love alone doesn't heal abandonment wounds. You could have the most devoted partner in the world, and still, their love won't feel like enough if you haven't turned inward. You can't outsource healing. The child waiting in the forest doesn't only want someone else, they want you. That's why the practices we talked about earlier, journaling, boundaries, self-soothing matter so much. A partner can walk beside you, but they can't walk for you. Healing comes from meeting your own shadow, while letting others support that journey. Love is one of the most powerful mirrors for the shadow. It amplifies both fear and possibility. It cracks us open, but it can also stitch us back together. And when you begin to integrate the wound of abandonment in love, you unlock a new way of relating, not as a savior or a threat, but as two whole humans meeting in truth. From here, let's step outside romance and look at another place where abandonment quietly shapes us, our work and our social lives. Because the shadow doesn't just live at home. It follows us into meetings, friendships, and communities, influencing the way we show up in the world. The fear of abandonment doesn't only live in love. It seeps into the way we work, the friendships we keep, and the roles we play in society. The shadow doesn't stay at home. It follows us into meetings, into group chats, into every room where belonging feels uncertain. Think about the workplace. For many, a job isn't just about income, it's tied to identity and security. That's why the abandonment wound shows up so strongly there. Picture the employee who never says no, even when drowning in tasks, terrified that setting a boundary will make them expendable. Or the colleague who stays late every night, not from passion, but from fear that if they rest, they'll be replaced. On the surface, this looks like dedication. Underneath, it's the shadow whispering, "If I'm not endlessly useful, they'll let me go." This creates burnout, resentment, and in some cases, exploitation. Because when fear drives performance, people become easy to manipulate, and what started as a search for security ends up eroding it. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, if I stopped performing, would I still feel like I mattered here? The unease in that question often reveals just how much fear, not genuine drive, has been steering the wheel. The same wound shows up in friendships. Some people become the always available friend, showing up for everyone else while neglecting themselves. Others live with constant anxiety about being excluded. They scroll through social media, scanning photos of gatherings they weren't invited to, and feel the sting of invisibility. But here's the irony. This vigilance often creates the very distance they fear. Friends begin to feel the pressure, the desperation, the constant need for reassurance. Slowly, they pull back. And once again, the story repeats itself. See, you don't belong. Abandonment also hides behind masks we wear in public. Maybe it's the polished online persona. Maybe it's the perfect parent image. Maybe it's the flawless professional who never cracks. These masks serve as armor. They say, if I look perfect, no one will reject me. But the more we perform, the more disconnected we feel. People may admire the mask, but the real self remains unseen. And deep down, that invisibility only deepens the loneliness. Then there's silence. In meetings, it looks like holding back ideas for fear of being dismissed. In friendships, it looks like avoiding needs for fear of being too much. Silence feels safe in the moment, but over time, it becomes another form of abandonment, because by silencing yourself to avoid rejection, you end up rejecting yourself first. Here's the good news. When you begin to face these wounds, work and social life transform. You stop performing out of fear and begin contributing from authenticity. You stop clinging to friendships and start choosing them out of mutual respect. You stop hiding behind masks and let yourself be seen as you really are. Belonging stops being something fragile you beg for. It becomes something you embody, because true belonging never comes from pleasing everyone else. It comes from refusing to abandon yourself. The shadow doesn't just haunt your private life. It threads through boardrooms, classrooms, group chats, and gatherings. It hides in ambition, in silence, in masks. But the moment you see it clearly, you start to rewrite the script. And now, we turn to a space where the fear of abandonment can take an even trickier form: spirituality. Because when the wound becomes unbearable, many people turn to spiritual practices for comfort. Sometimes that brings healing, but other times it becomes another way to avoid facing the shadow. Jung called it spiritual bypassing, and it's one of the most subtle traps of all. When the fear of abandonment feels unbearable, many people turn to spirituality for relief. On the surface, this looks like healing meditation, prayer, affirmations, rituals. But sometimes, instead of mending the wound, spirituality becomes a hiding place. Jung called this spiritual bypassing, using spiritual language or practices to avoid facing pain. And when it comes to abandonment, this bypass can be especially tempting. Imagine someone repeating phrases like, "I am whole, I am never alone, everything is love." At first that sounds uplifting. But if deep down they're still terrified of being left, those words become armor, not medicine. The shadow doesn't vanish because you cover it in light. The more you deny it, the louder it knocks. That's why you'll often see people who appear deeply spiritual still struggling in relationships. They speak of detachment, yet they panic when their partner pulls away. They preach unconditional love, yet collapse when they feel excluded. The wound hasn't been healed, it's only been masked. Another trap is the vow of radical independence. I don't need anyone. I am self-sufficient. Attachment is weakness. On the surface, this sounds enlightened, rising above need. But often, it's the shadow wearing new clothes. It's the abandoned child, now grown, swearing never to need anyone again. But humans are wired for connection. To deny that need isn't transcendence, it's avoidance. True healing doesn't erase longing, it teaches you how to hold it without drowning in fear. Abandonment wounds can also push people to seek the perfect teacher or community. At first, the group feels like family, the teacher like a savior. But sooner or later, cracks appear. The teacher disappoints, the community fractures, and the wound of abandonment reopens. The shadow whispers, "If I find the right spiritual parent, I'll never be left again." But this sets you up for repeated heartbreak, because no external guide can replace the inner work. Teachers can support, communities can nurture, but only you can meet your own shadow. Another subtle trap is dissociation, floating above the body, escaping into visions, mantras, philosophies, anything but the raw ache of loneliness. But dissociation isn't enlightenment, it's escape. And while you escape, the shadow waits untouched in the dark. So what's the alternative? It isn't abandoning spirituality, it's transforming it. Using spiritual practice not to hide, but to integrate. Meditation becomes a place to sit with your fear instead of fleeing from it. Prayer becomes a conversation with your wounded inner child. Rituals become promises. I will not abandon myself, even when others do. Here's a practice to try. Light a candle, not to banish the dark, but to sit with it. Then write in your journal, "Shadow, what do you want me to know right now?" Close your eyes, breathe. Let whatever comes rise without judgment. It may be silence, it may be a wave of emotion. The point isn't control, the point is listening. This turns spirituality into dialogue rather than denial. You stop pretending the wound isn't there and you begin to invite it into sacred space. And in that invitation, the shadow softens. The path of true spirituality is not escape, it's integration. It's learning to hold both the light and the dark, both love and fear, both wholeness and the wound. When you walk that path, spirituality no longer becomes a way to avoid abandonment. It becomes the very ground where you learn to face it. From here, we turn to Jung's deeper philosophy. Because the fear of abandonment isn't only personal, it's also collective. Entire cultures and communities carry shadows that mirror our own. And when we see that bigger picture, we begin to understand that our healing ripples far beyond ourselves. Up until now, we've been exploring abandonment as a personal wound, something that shows up in your relationships, in your work, in your private inner world. But Jung reminded us of something larger. The shadow isn't only individual, it's also collective. Entire cultures, societies, even nations carry shadows. And abandonment is one of the most universal. Look back at history. Tribes feared exile because being cast out meant death. Cities feared betrayal because being abandoned by allies meant destruction. Even today, whole groups live with the fear of being left behind economically, politically, socially. This collective fear shapes behavior just as much as personal fear does. Nations cling to power, terrified of being discarded. Communities build walls, afraid of rejection. Companies chase endless growth to avoid becoming irrelevant. Beneath all of it, the same wound whispers, "We cannot bear to be forgotten." You can see it in modern life too. Think about social media. Why does losing followers, being unfriended, or ignored online cut so deeply? It's not just vanity. It's the collective shadow of abandonment playing out on a global stage. A single silence, a lack of likes, a message left unopened can feel like exile from the tribe. Or consider cancel culture. At its best, it can hold people accountable. But beneath it lies a deeper terror. The fear of social abandonment. The fear that one mistake could erase your belonging overnight. It's the primal wound, now expressed through modern systems. Jung spoke often of archetypes, universal images that live in the collective unconscious. One of the most powerful is the orphan, the abandoned child, the outcast hero, the wanderer searching for a home. This figure appears in myths and stories all over the world. Why? Because it reflects something we all know. Every one of us carries an orphan within the part that wonders if we truly belong, if we'll be chosen, if we'll be left behind. But the orphan story isn't just about survival. It's also about transformation. From feeling unwanted to finding inner strength. From being abandoned to learning never to abandon yourself. This is the same path we walk in shadow work, turning wounds into wisdom. You can see the collective shadow in families, workplaces, even spiritual communities. Think of the relative no one mentions because they don't fit the mold. The employee excluded from decisions, treated as if invisible. The seeker cast out of a group for asking too many questions. These are not just personal rejections, they're collective enactments of the same wound. And every time a group rejects someone, it convinces itself it's safer without the outsider. But what is denied externally always mirrors what has been denied internally. The wound doesn't disappear, it festers. So what does it mean to heal this wound collectively? Just like personal healing, it starts with awareness. When societies admit the ways they exile certain groups, when families face the truths they've hidden, when communities embrace differences instead of rejecting them, that's when the shadow begins to soften. This is why Jung believed personal work and collective healing are inseparable. Every time you face your own shadow, you're also shifting the collective story. Each moment you refuse to abandon yourself, you weaken the larger pattern of abandonment in the world. And here lies the deeper truth. What we fear most often holds the seed of transformation. The fear of abandonment, whether personal or collective, points us toward the longing for true belonging. Not the kind based on masks, performance, or control, but the kind rooted in authenticity. When you integrate your shadow, you stop chasing belonging as something fragile that others grant you. You begin to carry it inside yourself. And from that place, you connect with others not from desperation, but from wholeness. The fear of abandonment is ancient. It lives in each of us, and it lives in all of us. But it doesn't have to define us. The shadow is not an enemy. It is a teacher. And the lesson of abandonment is this: wholeness begins the moment you refuse to abandon yourself. Now, as we come to the final part of this journey, let's gather everything we've explored, the stories, the signs, the practices, and bring it all together. Because this work isn't just about understanding. It's about choosing to walk forward, carrying the lantern you found in the forest. We began this journey with the image of a child lost in the forest, frightened, waiting, unsure if anyone would come back. That image has followed us through every step, because in many ways, that child lives in each of us. Every silence, every distance, every rejection echoes back to that moment. Will I be left behind? We've uncovered how this fear shapes love, friendships, careers, even spirituality. We've seen how it drives clinging, people-pleasing, overachieving, withdrawal, and even choices that guarantee heartbreak. We've seen how it hides in collective patterns in families, communities, entire societies. And yet, here's the most important truth. You are not doomed to repeat this story forever. The shadow isn't here to destroy you. It's here to be seen, to be integrated, to be transformed. That child in the forest has been waiting, not for a partner, not for a savior, but for you. Shadow work doesn't erase the fear of abandonment. It changes your relationship with it. Instead of being swept away by panic, you learn to pause, breathe, and listen. Instead of sabotaging love, you learn to name your needs with honesty. Instead of performing for approval, you begin to live from authenticity. And here's the paradox. When you stop abandoning yourself, the fear of being abandoned by others begins to lose its grip. Relationships feel freer, work feels healthier, spirituality feels deeper. Belonging is no longer something fragile that others control. It becomes something you carry within, steady, unshakable, real. So let me ask you, what would your life look like if you stopped abandoning yourself? If you showed up fully for the parts you've hidden? If you carried your lantern into the forest, not waiting for rescue, but walking forward with courage? The path of shadow work isn't easy. It asks for honesty, for patience, for compassion. But every step brings you closer to freedom, and you don't have to do it all at once. Start with one journal entry, one small boundary, one honest conversation. Each act is a message to your shadow. I see you. I will not leave you behind. This is how old wounds become new strength. This is how the lost child becomes the wise guide. This is how fear turns into power. And as you walk this path, remember, you're not alone. Every person who chooses to face their shadow adds light to the collective. The shadow only has power when it's hidden. The moment you bring it into the open, it becomes your greatest teacher. The fear of abandonment, once faced, becomes the ground where you discover true belonging, belonging that no one can take away. So carry your lantern, step into the forest, and know that every step you take is a step toward wholeness. We've walked through a long journey together, from the child lost in the forest, to the hidden patterns that shape our lives, to the ways this ancient wound threads itself through love, work, spirituality, and even our collective story. And now we arrive at the heart of it all. The fear of abandonment is powerful. It can drive you to cling, to chase, to overperform, to withdraw, to repeat heartbreak after heartbreak. It can silence you in groups, make you wear masks, push you toward people who cannot stay. Left in the dark, it shapes your choices without you even realizing it. But here's the shift. The moment you choose to face it, the power begins to move back into your hands. Shadow work doesn't erase the fear. It teaches you how to walk with it. It gives you language for the whispers in the dark. It shows you how to hold your own hand when the child inside you trembles. When you stop abandoning yourself, you discover a kind of belonging that no one else can grant or take away. Relationships feel freer because they're built on truth rather than desperation. Work feels lighter because you're no longer proving your worth through exhaustion. Spirituality feels deeper because it's no longer an escape, but a meeting place between your light and your dark. So let me leave you with this question. What would your life look like if you carried your lantern into the forest every time fear called your name? Not to chase it away, not to hide from it, but to walk beside it with courage. This path is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about noticing when the old story returns and choosing to write a new one. One journal entry. One honest no. One breath whispered to yourself, I will not leave you behind. Every step matters. Every small act is a seed of transformation. Over time, fear becomes less of a cage and more of a doorway. The abandoned child becomes the guide. The wound becomes the wisdom. And as you walk forward, remember, you are not alone. Every person listening, every person reflecting on their shadow is part of this same journey. Together, we bring light into the places that once felt unbearable. The shadow only has power when it's hidden. When you bring it into the open, it becomes your greatest teacher. And the fear of abandonment, once faced, becomes the very ground where you discover the belonging you've been searching for all along. So take your lantern, step into the forest, and know that every step you take is a step toward wholeness.